This is a short video lecture series for Chapter 3 titled Ecosystems, What Are They and How Do They Work? The slide in front of you has a list of key terms associated with this chapter, and I've highlighted several that are important for you to pay attention to, especially the abiotic and biotic terms associated with the ecosystems, as well as gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. One of the things you're going to be learning about in this short video lecture series is geochemical cycles or biogeochemical cycles, and we'll be looking at the carbon cycle as well as the nitrogen cycle, the sulfur cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. In addition, we'll be looking at food webs and food pyramids, so having an understanding of primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, in addition to what trophic level that consumer is found at within the food web. Some additional keywords to call your attention to is ecosystem. An ecosystem represents the biotic organisms and the abiotic components which influence which organisms actually live there, and we'll define biotic and abiotic in a future slide. Biome, I just want to bring your attention back to this term, is a region on Earth distinguished by climate, which you learned about in the previous chapters. Biodiversity is a term you'll hear throughout the entire semester, and that refers to the variety of species. Endemic species is one area greater risk of loss or a vulnerable species. And then habitat refers to a geographic location of species, and then a niche is a specific role that the species plays in an ecosystem. Your core case study for this chapter focused on tropical rainforests and deforestation. Forests cover only 2% of the Earth's surface, but can contain up to half of the world's terrestrial plant and animal species. Forests are being impacted by logging, agriculture, including crop development and cattle grazing, as well as urbanization, population growth. Pictured on this slide in the bottom left corner is an example of clear cutting, and in the bottom right corner is a diagram depicting South America with the extensiveness of the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon tropical rainforest has experienced the greatest loss, with Indonesia being second. This tropical rainforest covers over 2.3 million square miles and is primarily found in the country of Brazil. Brazil is the largest country in South America and has a total area of over 3,280,000 square miles. This coastline of Brazil has over 4,500 miles in length. And according to the 2010 census, the country has an estimated population of about 190 million people living in the country of Brazil. It is ranked 5th in the world in terms of the most populated nation, with India, China, and the United States having a greater population than Brazil. The Amazon rainforest is not only located in Brazil, but also in Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, a small portion in Guyana, and Suriname. The Amazon tropical rainforest is definitely the largest rainforest in the world, and it's filled with biodiversity. The area 1 in 10 species is found in the tropical rainforest in Brazil. This area encompasses half of the planet's remaining tropical rainforests. There are over 4,100 miles of winding rivers throughout the Amazon rainforest, including the Amazon River. And about 40% of South America is comprised of the Amazon rainforest. There is a clear link between the health of the planet and the rainforest. The rainforest contains about 90 to 140 billion metric tons of carbon and helps stabilize local and global climate. So what is the cause of deforestation? They're listed on the screen in front of you: cattle ranching, logging, agriculture, oil, and dams, to name a few. The graphic on the far right depicts in a pie chart the causes of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest, and cattle ranching between the year 2000 and 2005 was the main cause of cutting down the trees. After cattle ranching, it was considered to be small-scale agriculture, between 20 to 25%, and then large-scale agriculture, and then logging. So cattle ranching and agriculture were the primary causes of the deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. Now, as far as cattle ranching, the price of beef approximately doubles in Brazilian currency to countries like the US, Europe, and China. Also, logging being 2 to 3% based on the pie chart. Trees are being cut down to be made into furniture and paper, and the remains are being used for production of charcoal. One of the pressures on Brazil is that China has a very large demand for wood since they've cut down many of their own forests in their own country. Hence, there's a good bit of export of wood from Brazil to China. In addition, there's some socioeconomic issues associated with deforestation in South America. Those living in poverty or poor conditions see deforestation, cutting down trees, as a job opportunity, and they will actually move into the rainforest area to start a new life without any sort of thought process of the effects of deforestation, because they are just trying to make a few bucks in order to put food on their table. So poverty does also contribute to the trees being cut down in South America in the Amazon rainforest. In addition, there are regions within South America where there are metals, minerals, diamonds, aluminum, and gold. As a result, those areas are targeted for mining, and one of the main importers of these metals and minerals is China again. There's also the Transcontinental Railway, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail on a different slide, and then the building and constructing of dams within on some of the major rivers that are in the tropical rainforest cause issues, because when you build a dam, you flood a reservoir, and that has impact in itself. So a timeline depicting the history of deforestation specific to Brazil and Indonesia. So the green bar charts represent Brazil deforestation, and the orange bar charts represent Indonesia. And this is annual forest loss values from 2000 until 2012. So looking at this chart, it appears that there was a gradual increase in deforestation in Brazil up through 2004, and then a gradual decrease in deforestation until about the year 2009. We did have an increase in deforestation in 2009, 2010. Then it backed down again and went back up to about 25,000 annual forest lost in Brazil. So what contributed to this? Well, back in 1968, the Brazilian government began building roads in central Brazil, which led to the Trans-Amazon Highway. This was a highway that was supposed to be over 5,000 miles long, but because of a financial crisis in 1970, the highway only reached about 2,400 miles. That's about the distance between Pennsylvania and Wyoming, going from the East Coast to the western portion of the United States. Many roads were actually constructed illegally. This highway had impact on villages of indigenous tribes living in the Amazon who never had much contact with other people but themselves. It resulted in diseases which killed hundreds of natives, and natives were also forced to relocate because of the highway building. Many tribes went further out into the forest, and this allowed more industries to come into the forest with ease. In other words, there was no one to fight off the encroachment and development. With that being said, a highway had been partially built, causing an indirect contribution to deforestation, which in the 1970s, many farmers and ranchers and loggers took advantage of this highway to fund their own means, where they began to illegally harvest and transport timber. Ranching began unprofitable in some locations because of poor soil conditions, so they would find another patch of land and they would slash and burn to remove the trees and start raising cattle again. The soils in the Amazon rainforest, once you remove the trees and expose those soils to direct sunlight, they become very hard, almost as hard as brick, and they don't have good nutrients in them because you've just removed the forest canopy, and it's difficult to plant crops as well as graze cattle on this area that was deforested. So it's not a sustainable method. So from the 1970s to the 1990s, this was an unsustainable way of cutting trees down, trying to ranch on this deforested land, and it just wasn't working well. In the 1990s, ranching grew because of exports to Europe. Europe was paying for really high prices for beef, and raising cattle became profitable. So more people began to clear land in the rainforest, and more people became employed. At this time, there weren't very many restraints on farming, so farms would double the size of their cattle and would continue cutting the trees down. Again, it created more jobs, and the Brazilian government and economists saw this as an investment since Brazilian beef was very competitive on a global scale. Brazil was almost giving land away in the Amazon to encourage people to grab a stake of land of about 125 acres in order to farm and ranch on it. So in 1995, about 48% of the deforestation was due to farmers, but keep in mind that this doesn't count the amount of illegal farming that was going on as well. Then in the year 2000s, which are depicted on this figure in front of you, many rules and regulations were implemented by organizations such as CITES, C-I-T-E-S, that's the Convention on to Protect Endangered Species, Greenpeace, and World Wildlife Fund. They wanted to raise money to preserve the Amazon. As you can see, from 2000 to 2005, there was a large increase in deforestation, even though many organizations tried to prevent this from happening. So what ended up happening was we weren't able to track down illegal acts of deforestation. So in 2004, Brazil actually established more than 70,000 square miles of parks, nature reserves, and national forests in the Amazon to make up for past loss of forests and try to preserve the lands. Due to limited time, I am going to cover net change in forest area from a global perspective in the next short video lecture series.